This is a Film Stories original podcast.
This episode is brought to you by Shopify. Upgrade your business with Shopify, home of the #1 checkout on the planet. Shop Pay boosts conversions up to 50%, meaning fewer carts going abandoned and more sales going cha-ching. So if you're into growing your business, get a commerce platform that's ready to sell wherever your customers are. Visit shopify.com to upgrade your selling today.
Welcome to Japan on Film Podcast. I'm your host, Perry Constantine, and welcoming back someone who is becoming a recurring guest now, and that is Jennifer Upton. Jen, how you doing today?
Hey, great. Thanks for having me back.
Glad to have you back. This is now your third time on the show, if I'm not mistaken. So you are quickly rising in the ranks of regular guests over here.
Oh, amazing. I just love talking about movies. So any chance I get to do that, I'm on board.
And we're always happy to have you come on, especially since you've got to wake up a little bit early on your side of the world to get here to match Japan's time zone.
That's all right. I've got my coffee.
Okay, great. Now today we're talking about a interesting film, which is the 2000 film Versus, directed by Ryuhei Kitamura and starring Tak Sakaguchi. And like we were talking about off mic, this is a movie that so oftentimes when we have guests on, sometimes guests are trying to remember the names and everything like that. And this one, we don't have to worry about that because none of the characters have any names.
Yeah. That's one of the really cool things about this movie. Like the first time I saw it was when it was new. And I lived in Los Angeles and I saw it with a full packed audience in a theater. And I walked out thinking, what was that guy's name? Oh, and it never even occurred to me while I was watching it that nobody had any names until I walked out.
I had the exact same reaction where I was trying to think about names and stuff like that. And then I looked up at IMDb and it's like, oh, there are no names. Okay.
No.
But I think that's a good place to start is our first experiences with this film. So you were just, so tell us a little bit more about your initial experience with this film. And if you can remember, what was like kind of your impressions of it after the first time you saw it?
I loved it the first time I saw it, but I also saw it with a sold out audience that was raring to go. So cheers, really like full on cinephile audience. And I believe they showed quite a few. There was like, it was a film festival that week or for 2 whole weeks of Japanese films. So the people who were there, nobody had seen this, nobody had heard of Ryuhei Kitamura at that point, but everybody just loved it. And because it does kind of hit that sweet spot between, it's like a John Woo movie in style. And then there's a couple of scenes where they even make fun of the Matrix, like full on in this movie. And I think the people that were in attendance understood all the references and it's just a fun movie.
Yeah, I first saw this also when it first came out in the West, and it had a limited theatrical run. So I saw this at the Music Box Theater, which is a famous movie theater in Chicago. And just like you, it was an audience that was very much raring to go. They were very, enthused about it. It was a very kind of active atmosphere, which I feel is kind of like probably the way you should watch this film. Probably the only way you should really watch this film is with like a big audience of people or people who are really into this kind of thing, because watching it on my own, it wasn't as interesting to me as it was when I was in that theater atmosphere.
I totally agree. Although I rewatched it last night with my husband and he was into it. He was he was like, oh, this is really cool. Like what's going on? The portal and all that stuff. And then about more than 3/4 through, he was like, so what's going on with the portal? Because they bring it up at the beginning and then it's a really long time before they mention it again. And he's like, well, what's going on with the forest? And because they're in the forest of resurrection and it never explains why the forest has the power that it does. And I think it's just, you have to let it go. You have to just suspend your disbelief and go, well, this is this special place. And he maybe didn't get the reference to, there are special places like that in Japan. Like that, historically going back 1,000 years, people go, oh, this particular forest has this oni living in it, or this or that. So there's a little bit of that he didn't get, but he still really liked it. So, but yes, for the best possible time, see it with a lot of people.
Yes. Now there are a few different versions of this movie, and so there's the original cut. There's an R-rated cut that Media Blasters produced, which cut out some of the gore scenes, and it's about
Yeah.
4 minutes shorter. And then there's the Ultimate Edition, which is has 10 minutes of new features. Now, unless I got my DVD back in the States, and I actually had to buy this movie twice on DVD, because the first time I bought it, a friend of mine, she was dating this guy at the time who was into movies and stuff, and we talked about movies and stuff, and I had mentioned about Versus, and he's like, "Oh, I wanted to see that," and I'm like, "Okay, well, here, you can borrow my DVD." Then they broke up, and then my friend's like, she's like, "Yeah, it was a bad breakup. I don't think you're getting your movie back." So I had to go and buy it again. Um, and I'm not sure which version I bought. It's not the Ultimate Edition. I definitely know that, but it was either the original cut or the R-rated cut that I got, but I'm not exactly sure which one. Obviously, I saw the original one in the theater, but I can't really recall which one. I can't really recall much difference from what I saw in the theater versus what I saw in the DVD, because we're going back 24 years now, so it's tough to remember.
Exactly. Yeah, I've only seen the R-rated cut. I think that's the version they showed in Los Angeles.
Okay, and that's the one you watched today as well?
Yeah. But again, I've seen two different versions. I have the older DVD, and then for some reason, because I have an older Super Drive DVD player, I couldn't get the Japanese language track, so I had to go and find it streaming, and that was the R-rated cut because it had all the heart ripping in it, which is great.
Yeah, I had an interesting problem with this too, where because I had ripped my whole movie library, DVD library, to my Plex server a few years ago, and I haven't gone back and watched all those movies, because we're talking like over 1,000. And so there's some on my Plex server that I've never watched, and when I watch them, I'm just like, oh crap, there's this subtitle file is not there, or I chose the wrong audio track, and that was the problem with this, is the Japanese subtitle file did not rip. So I had
Oh,
either the Japanese audio track or the English audio track, and I'm like, okay, you know what? I'm going to just rip the DVD again. And then it turns out my DVD was scratched to hell and unreadable now. So I had
yeah.
to make do with what I had there and try to search for different subtitle files that were all kind of like out of sync, because there are like so many different versions of this movie.
Yep.
Um, and I was going back and forth. I'm like, oh well, let me just. It's not a really deep movie, so I can probably get by with just the English dub. But honestly, the dub is really bad.
It's terrible. That's what I mean. I started it. I got 15 minutes into it, went, no, I can't do this. I absolutely cannot do this. So I went and found, the Japanese language track version, but and it's so much better because whoever they hired, I don't know the company they hired, but the performances of the voice actors is really like old school stiff. Like they're not quite sure whether they should play it straight or is this a joke?
Yeah,
And the actors are all playing it straight when you watch the Japanese language track. So
yeah, it was bad. It was really bad.
yeah, it's
Finally,
really bad.
I was able to finally find a subtitle file that was more or less in sync. So
Yeah.
and the
Yeah.
Japanese in it, again, it's not like a really in-depth movie, so the Japanese in there was pretty easy to follow for the most part as well.
Yes. Yes.
Um, But let's talk a little bit about this director, Ryuhei Kitamura.
Mm,
So I think
mm,
one of the greatest things about this movie is the fact that it had a budget of $10,000.
I
I mean,
know.
and it does not look like that. I mean, it doesn't look like a big budget movie, but it also doesn't look like $10,000. Like I would think
No.
at least $50,000.
At least, yeah. I think more. Because some of the like you said, the gore effects are really, really well done. Like stuff you'd see in The Walking Dead, like high level stuff. And the camera work, some of those shots, obviously they didn't have a long shooting schedule, but some of the shots in this movie are very complicated.
Yeah, and to put this in context, because I looked this up because I was curious. So Clerks, which was all shot in a convenience store where Kevin Smith worked. So and they would film after hours. So he'd be working there during the day, and then at night they'd close the shutters, which is why the shutters are always closed in the movie, and he'd film inside the store. And that cost him $27,000.
I know.
Evil
I know.
Dead, which is one of the big influences of this movie,
Yes.
$350,000.
Yeah.
Now,
I
granted,
know.
this was back when everything was filmed. They didn't have digital, so it was
Yeah.
obviously there are some cheaper options, but still, I mean, it's amazing what he was able to do with the budget of $10,000. I mean, that wouldn't even cover the appetizer budget of the catering of one of the Marvel movies.
Exactly. I said the same thing about Godzilla -1. I said that movie is the craft services budget for, Age of Ultron. So it's another older example versus as another older example of the great films that come out of Japan on small budgets. And it points to the excess of Hollywood and why we can't make movies that are this good, reasonably priced.
No, I think that's a I mean, I love big budget movies too, but I do think there is a fair argument to be said about the budgets don't need to be this big. And
No.
I think movies like this, and like you said, Godzilla -1, we just covered that on the show a few episodes ago. I
Mhm.
was amazed at how well
Yeah.
that movie turned out with the budget it had. I mean, I would think that has a budget similar to like the legendary Godzilla movies, but it doesn't. Nowhere close to it.
Nope. Nope. I do hope that kind of I hope that it brings about a shift that people start looking at what you can do, especially with all the digital technology. You can literally make a movie with your laptop now, and an iPhone. So it's just a matter of getting out there, getting it done, getting a script written, casting it, and all that stuff. But yeah, this director really kind of took what came before it and just ran with it. I mean, you mentioned influences of Evil Dead. Definitely, there's a few shots that are right out of Evil Dead. But he's also said in interviews that George Miller is a big influence. So the Mad Max films, which for their time were not huge budget films. What's the other one he said he loved?
Highlander was also an
A
influence.
Highlander, that's right. Yeah, and that makes sense because the main guy they're immortal. So yeah, that's in here. But yeah, but it's not, and of course John Woo. And I think it did well. Maybe it didn't do well. I think it did well because it was an entertaining film, but I also think it just came a year after The Matrix? I forget what year that came out. And
Yeah,
there is a
Matrix
little
was
bit,
1999. This was 2000. So, I
yeah.
mean,
So it's got a lot of the same fight choreography style, and so it kind of latched onto that in terms of, oh, we can get a release in the West and it'll do okay. Um, but I actually like this kind of a little bit better than The Matrix. I don't know. I was never a huge fan of The Matrix, so
I personally wouldn't go that far. I definitely think I preferred the Matrix to
yeah,
this. I think there's more meat on the bone with the Matrix, whereas this is just a
yeah,
full
that's
on
true.
crowd pleasing movie.
It
But
is, but it's
yeah,
fun. It's just,
it's
and
fun.
everybody
It's
looks
completely
great
fun.
doing it. Yeah, yeah. I
But I
mean,
do
there's
think that
so many.
because this took 7 months to film due to like
Yeah,
weather issues and some financial issues. So I'd imagine like this was probably in production when The Matrix was released. So maybe there was
yeah,
I think maybe they were just pulling from like the same kinds of sources where we had like,
yeah,
John Woo and that kind of thing.
Yeah, yeah. I did notice rewatching it for this podcast that you actually can see the not only the weather changing behind the actors, but the seasons. And I did think, oh yeah, this had a really long shoot because you can see it's spring, then it's summer and it's hazy, and then all of a sudden there's leaves on the ground and it's like, oh, but it works because the forest is supposed to be sort of this magical place. So you can kind of buy that there's a change in lighting and weather over a course of what's supposed to be like a day, maybe not even a whole day.
And I think that that actually works out to the film's benefit, because if this had been in, like a standard movie, those changes that happen, the changing of the seasons, the weather and all that, we would probably pick up on those and be like, "Oh, wait, what the hell? Like what's the continuity like in this?" But because this is like this otherworldly forest, it actually kind of works for the film's
Yeah,
benefit.
exactly. It really does. It's especially when they add fog to some of the shots. Like you can see that they added it, but it really works. It's like, oh, all of a sudden it's dark now. Not like nighttime dark, but darker, and there's all this mist. And it's usually right before a big fight scene, there's some mist. So it almost like is like, oh, something's gonna happen. It's signal. I'm not sure if he meant to do that or if he just thought this looked cool and then it worked out in the editing, but it does work.
Now, about Kitamura, you mentioned, yes, influenced by Sam Raimi and George Miller. He also said that John Carpenter's movies were an influence too, so I just want to mention that too.
Yeah, oh yeah.
Now, how familiar are you with Kitamura's work in general?
I have seen Godzilla Final Wars. I have not. I have on my watch list in my queue Midnight Meat Train, but I have not seen it yet. I've been waiting for a night or an evening when I don't have anything else in the background going on because I really want to watch that and concentrate. Um, but I know that this is the movie that kind of was his breakthrough, and before then, he lived in Australia, right, for a while, or he went to film school. And there was a story about he was going to school for something else, and he just got up and walked out of class and said, "I'm going to go make movies." Um, which,
Yeah, I'm looking. Yes, yes. Here we go.
which is pretty cool.
He spent more of his adolescent years at the cinema than school, and at
Yeah,
16, he decided to become a filmmaker. And then the year after that, he dropped out of high school, telling his teacher and walking out during class. And then he moved to Australia a week later, because a lot of his influences were like George Miller, Russell Mulcahy, Peter Ware, and
yeah,
NXS. And he went to a
yeah,
school for visual arts in Sydney for 2 years. Um, and and he got there after he directly asked the principal, "Just let me in." And he said he thought I
yeah.
was a funny guy, so he let me in.
Yeah. That I love that about him. Like the more I read about him, I go, he's 55 years old, so he's only like three years older than me, which means he's fully Generation X. And you see that in his attitude and in his filmmaking style. Like he doesn't give a shit. He just does what he wants to do, and there's no apologies for it.
Yeah, I think that the story to it's also reminds me of Takashi Miike in a little bit of a way, because they both have this kind of like very unconventional approach where Miike, he never went to class when he was going to film school. So
Yeah.
so everyone else is like working on their student film projects and everything. And he sees a flyer asking for like an intern or something. He's like, all right, I guess I'll do this instead of going to class. And then he ends up getting a job.
Yeah. I've
and
always sort
and
of
then
felt like maybe being a filmmaker, you have to have a little bit of ADD to be a really good filmmaker. So
well, I think too, it's this idea of, not asking permission. It's
yeah.
just like it's amazing what you can get just by saying it, just like saying it out loud.
Yes. Yeah, it's like you manifest it. He's like, "Yeah, no, I'm done with the school thing. I'm gonna go and do this." And he did it, and he did it really well. And his career has been incredible. Obviously, if your first movie is Versus, you're gonna have a pretty good career. Because yeah, he's made movies in also in Japan and in the West. So he's done well for himself.
Hmm. And yeah, so Versus was my introduction to him as well. And I've also seen a few of his other movies. So I saw Midnight Meat Train. I really enjoyed that. I have not seen any of his Godzilla stuff, but I
Mhm.
have seen Sky High. Not
Oh, yeah.
the Tim Allen superhero film, which a lot of people think I talk about
Yeah,
whenever I
no.
mention that, but no, this was it was like this kind of cool, like supernatural science fiction-y type of movie. And it was based on a manga and also apparently a prequel to a Japanese TV drama. Um, and it was like this woman who dies. She's killed by like a serial killer, and she goes to the afterlife, and then she has to try and help her late fiance, her fiance who's still alive, and a detective try and solve the mystery. and and it's been like maybe 20 years since I saw it, but I remember really kind of digging it and thinking it was really kind of fun. Also, it had Eiji Shina from Audition as one of the like afterlife guardians, which is really cool too.
Oh, that's amazing. Yeah, yeah. Final Wars is a fun movie. It's very much a video game Godzilla. Like the fights are very much, you know, hyperkinetic, like visually the way Versus is, but it's kind of like a video game come to life.
I've heard a lot of people say that of the Heisei films, like Godzilla Final Wars is like one of their favorites because it's just
Yeah.
like completely, it's just complete action from start to finish.
Yeah, and it's the first time any Godzilla that I've seen was that action packed just and there was a video game that came out around that time that was a Nintendo Cube game. I can't remember what it was called, but it felt like you were playing that game watching this movie 100%. I cannot remember the name of the game, but it was a great game.
Well, speaking of video games, he also directed the cutscenes for Metal Gear Solid Twin Snakes.
Oh, that makes sense.
And
Yeah.
and he also directed Azumi and Alive,
Yep.
which I have both of those, but I have not actually seen them yet. But one of the things that he did direct on here, which is interesting, is a video documentary called Sakurajima, which is the
Mm.
name of the volcano here in Kagoshima. So I'm very curious to see
Mm.
that now and see like what that was he had done.
Yeah, interesting. And hasn't he done some TV work too? I feel like he has. Maybe I'm thinking about it's the actors probably that I'm thinking of. Kenji Matsuda.
Might
He was in a drama that I saw. I know he was.
Yeah, might be he did one TV film it looks like, but everything else it looks like just films here.
Okay. Yeah. Yeah, I need to
I-
kind of dig deeper, and I really want to see Midnight Meat Train. That's the one that keeps popping up. Everyone says see it, but I just haven't had time. So,
Yeah. Now I wanted to talk now some of the things that kind of jumped out at me with this movie. And first off, the fact that it's 444 portals. And I was
mhm.
wondering about the significance of that number. And the only thing I could come off with off the top of my head is the fact that, the number 4 is she in Japanese, which is also death.
Oh, yes, you're
So it's
right.
like,
Yeah.
so I guess you could say like triple deaths or something like
Triple
that
death.
is the only thing I
Yeah.
could really think of. And when you look at, we have these three main characters here, right? We have the prisoner, we have the girl, and I guess just the man is the other one, the main who's the
Mhm.
villain.
Yeah.
But did you have any thoughts about the significance of that 444 portals?
I didn't until you brought it up just now. But yeah, I just thought random number kind of filed it in the back of my brain, but it didn't really. I thought more the Forest of Resurrection to be more significant because there are a few places in Japan that are sort of designated as special forests. And so, yeah, that in theory, if you go back to some Shinto myths, then there would be portals in places.
The Force of Resurrection thing jumped out to me too, and the thing I first thought of that first came to mind about that is the so-called suicide forest.
Me too. That was what I thought of. I could not remember the name of it, but the one that's outside Tokyo. Yeah.
Yes. Aokigahara is what it's called.
Yes, that's right.
Yeah, that was my first thing, and I think that obviously would make sense if it's a place where lots of people are dying. Then having that into a place of resurrection or reincarnation would make a lot of
Yeah.
sense.
Yeah.
But and I also like this this police detective guy who his past keeps changing. Like, and
Yeah.
he trained he trained with the FBI at Langley. I thought was funny because Langley is actually where the CIA is.
Yes, and
And
he went to Yellowstone in Canada.
he grew up in Yellowstone in
Yeah.
Canada. Yeah.
Which is not even in Canada. So he's like making up like his whole past is sort of based on something he saw on TV. But because of that, you don't really know who he is or is he even a real policeman? Like, we don't know.
I also love how there's this scene when the prisoner, he's just kind of like, I'm just going to steal this dead guy's clothes just for no reason because his clothes are perfectly fine. And then he steals this dead guy's clothes and the jacket and everything, which of course looks awesome because now he's got like, full on Matrix style look, and it matches really well when they get the sword and the gun and all that.
Yeah.
But
yeah.
It and magically too, the dead guy's blood stains disappear.
I know. I did notice that. Yeah, there were some blood splatter inconsistencies, but it's fine. It doesn't take away from the experience.
And well, also when and I think it's the crazy Yakuza guy played by Kenji Matsuda, when he shoots this one guy, one of the zombies, while his foot is like perched on the tree or something like that. It's like these really bizarre gun angles, and it's just like this. This movie is just completely focused on what looks cool. They don't give a damn at all about what's practical.
No.
So we're gonna steal the dead guy's bloodstained clothes just because we want to wear a black trench coat, and we're gonna twist the gun in all these weird angles and put our foot on the tree when we fire just because it looks damn cool.
Yeah, he's my favorite character in the movie because he's above and beyond the Call of Duty for stealing scenes. Kenji Matsuda is like a combination of Nicolas Cage when he's at his craziest and Gary Oldman in The Professional.
Yeah.
I'm trying to think who else. There was somebody else that came to mind, but Anthony Wong, Chao Sang from Hard Boiled. Yeah.
And but I will say one of the characters that I wish we got to see a little bit more of was this this Yakuza lady with the 6-shooter who comes in later on in the movie. I'm like, that lady just looked cool as hell, and I'm just like, I want to follow her for a whole movie instead.
Definitely. And again, you don't know any of their names, how they came to be there, their backstory. Kenji Matsuda is trying to take over and become the new Yakuza boss, but you don't have a sense of how he knows these women, or you literally know nothing, and yet you instantly understand enough backstory to carry you through the film, which is really kind of an interesting experiment that I think Kitamura did, because it just shows how thin a backstory can be. You don't even, or a character, you don't need a name, you don't need anything. You just need to know these two people know each other and this is their motivation.
Yeah. Now, we're going to be right back after this, and then we'll talk more about Versus.
This episode is brought to you by MeUndies. While MeUndies can't totally help your love life this Valentine's Day, they can offer you insanely comfy undies and loungewear to buy or gift. MeUndies has so many awesome Valentine's Day prints and styles. Plus, you can match with your partner, friends, or even your pets. This Valentine's Day, give the gift that'll keep them thinking of you and score huge site-wide savings at MeUndies.com/Spotify. That's MeUndies.com/Spotify. MeUndies. Comfort from the outside in.
All right, and we're back. Talk a little bit more about Versus. Now, one of the things that I thought was interesting, too, is the fact that they have this scene where they realize that none of them has any memory of what happened before they came into the forest. Like, they can't really remember how they got there. They can't remember what they're doing there or anything. So I thought that was also kind of an interesting aspect of it, is the fact that this forest is just kind of, which also adds to another reason why this forest has this kind of like supernatural, otherworldly feel that when they go in there, they just get completely lost.
Yeah, my husband said about 3/4 into the film, he said, why don't they just leave? And I said, well, I don't think they can. I think it's kind of like, it's one of those things where if you kept walking and walking, you'd just still be in the forest. They never explicitly show you that, but that's what I gather. But people do come in. When the girls show up, they're driving in, and there's this, at the beginning they have this meeting, but so you can get there, but you maybe can't get out, but it's not explicitly ever dealt with in the film, that why they don't just leave.
Yeah, I don't know if you've you'd mentioned something about video games before, and that whole thing too. It made me think of the original Final Fantasy VII and how there's this area in the game called the Ancient Forest, where if you don't have a specific item, when you go in the forest, then you can't get out. There's like no way to escape. It's just like every time you go into a different map, it just keeps recycling the maps.
Yeah.
So that made me think of that too, like the idea
Yeah.
of, there is no escape here.
Yeah.
And
I
also
did
the
have
fact.
questions. Oh, I'm sorry.
Oh, sorry, go ahead. No, go right ahead. You go first.
I had questions about the main Yakuza boss, who is the ancient immortal Highlander character, basically. He's not resurrected. He's just always been. And they never give him a backstory. Like, where did he come from? How did he get his powers? It's not important. What's important is he's trying to open this portal and take over the world.
Yeah. And I don't even think he's necessarily like the head of the Yakuza. My read on it is that maybe he's like just hiring them or something along those lines.
Yeah, it's not really clear. But they keep referring to him as the boss. So is it just the boss for the day, or is it, because there is that in the version I saw with the subtitles, it said, well, why would he release a prisoner that he didn't know? Why would he summon him? So it's like, yeah, I guess you're right. He's sort of like just hired all these people. He's maybe not, but he's got to do something for a living, right? I mean, he can't just be wandering around.
It's also the question of if he has been alive this whole time, then like you suggest, then how is he able to leave the forest too? That's another thing too.
Yeah, he does say, he said, I've waited hundreds of years for the girl, to be reincarnated. So there's, so I assume he's just been wandering around Japan this whole time, maybe living life as a Yakuza, because I wouldn't expect him to, be a salaryman. It wouldn't be becoming of an immortal.
And now I didn't realize this, but just reading over the Wikipedia entry, I realize now what it is that there's this, for some reason, I guess I always equated them together, that Tak Sakaguchi's character was the samurai as well, but then but now I'm just being reminded here, looking over the Wikipedia plot summary, that actually, no, he was actually the samurai's ally back in the 10th century.
He was his brother, wasn't he? In the early scenes, or maybe the translations differ between, because I did go back and forth between, just to check, with the Japanese subtitling versus the English dub, and they are a little bit different. So it can, not that it really matters with a movie like this. It's but yeah, if you're looking to dig deeper onto who everybody is, the different versions of the film, whichever version you watch, the language, you're going to get little nuance changes like that, because they use the word brother in the dub that I saw, but it's not there in the subtitles. So
okay,
I think,
because I don't recall seeing brother in the subtitles I had.
It might be because there's the British DVD versus the American English DVD. It's it depends on who they got to do the translation. So,
and also, brother too may not mean a literal brother, because they have the, not only like in samurai clans or in Yakuza clans, where they, even though they're not blood relatives, they call each other like brother and that kind of thing. So there's that aspect of it. but also
Yes,
the
which
fact
is
that many times in Japanese when you're talking about someone else, because you don't use pronouns in Japanese so much. Like pronouns are
right.
very personal. So when you're referring to someone who is especially if you don't know their name, and like if you're a person working in a shop or something, then it's, you refer to them as okyakama, right, or customer. But you're just talking to like regular people, you'd find, like, if it's an old person, then you'd say like oji-san or oba-san, if for like an old man or
Yeah.
an old woman. But if they're
Mhm.
like, young adults, middle-aged adults, or something like that, youngish adults, they would usually call them by Onisan or Onesan, which are terms for like older brother or older sister.
Yes. Yeah, that's correct. But I think like if you don't know that, if you go in, you see the word brother, you think, oh, they're somehow related. But no,
Right.
I don't think they were. They were just allies.
Yeah, and there's nothing here. Like I said, in the Wikipedia summary, it just says ally. It doesn't say anything
Yeah.
about
Yeah.
brothers. So that's
Yeah.
my thought on it too. Um, Now the ending here is a bit. I'm a little bit confused by how things went down in the ending, because he kills the man, he rescues the girl, they escape the forest. Um, and then 99 years in the future, you've
Yeah.
got the man is now apparently like the hero or something, and he confronts the prisoner, and the girl tells the man that she should have been on his side 99 years before. So this idea, like the ending is a little bit confusing for me. How about you? What did you think about the ending?
I thought it was kind of one of those I want to say it's sort of, this is going to be a little deep for a movie like this, but kind of like Buddhism. Like maybe all these people have multiple lives, or they just keep existing, and every time it's slightly different. It's the same players, but they change roles. So if you're meant to know someone three or four different lives, maybe you interact from different points of view. Or it could be a video game type thing where you're just changing the characters up. You're playing a different character as a first person shooter game, so you can change who you play. So there's that aspect of it. It could be either way. I do remember when I saw it in the cinema, the audience just kind of gave out this collective like, oh, like it's starting all over again, and but now it's like, and it doesn't explain it. It's just this is what it is. So you can read into it deeply or not, or just say it was just a fun thing he wanted to do to give us a cliffhanger ending. So, because it could be another movie, and there had been a sequel in development for, I think, since 2013.
Mhm.
But it still hasn't happened. So I, would love to see it, because it basically would be the same story 99 years in the future, but all the actors are playing different, you know, they're, Tak is now the villain, and things like that. It would just, I'd see that though. I mean, you know,
Yeah, the last thing that mentions here on Wikipedia is apparently at one point Kitamura was thinking about doing an American remake of it, and he had said this
oh,
when they were doing when he was doing press for Midnight Meat Train,
yeah,
and he actually wrote a full script for the American version. Um, but then he said in 2010, he said that's the 10th anniversary of Versus, so I'm thinking of doing something special. The original film means a lot to me, has huge fans all the world, so I can't do anything easy or cheap. I can't guarantee anything in
mm,
the long run. It's a definite that I'll do the new Versus in the future for sure. And then in 2013, he said the sequel was in development. He had
yeah,
already written the script, and that Sakaguchi would likely return as the prisoner.
yeah.
And here's the funny part. He expressed his intention to release the film in 2014. So we're a little bit behind that date.
10 years. Yeah. Well,
Yeah.
he may be, he's made some good films since. So
He's a busy
maybe
guy,
those,
so
yeah, exactly. Maybe those offers were just too good to turn down.
um and yeah, he's done other stuff too. Like he did Lupin the Third,
Yeah, that's right.
a
That's right.
live action version of it.
Yeah.
And he also had a segment in Nightmare Cinema. He's going to be doing Black Friday 3D apparently.
Mm.
And so also he's
I
going to I
I
guess that's
thought
never happened because that was 2016 as well.
no, yeah, but things like that. I thought it was really interesting how quickly Toho picked him up after this movie came out. Like, we need this guy. He's, young, fresh, hip talent, which is what they've always done. They've always kind of kept their ear to the ground on that. And yeah, so it's interesting to see not only what he has done, but what he hasn't done. And I would love to see him do a sequel, especially now that the actors are all older.
Yeah. And also too, I'm wondering about what the girls rationale, especially because that's why, because that ending question, like I understand the whole idea of them being two sides of the same coin, so maybe one is
Yeah.
worse than the other. um but and also there's also the whole the Dark Knight, if you die a hero, live long enough to be the villain type of thing too, that idea too. But
Yeah,
also
yeah.
the fact that the man explicitly says, I need to sacrifice her to open the portal and obtain the power of darkness, which is very vague about what that exactly means. So for
Yeah,
her to then
yeah,
turn around and say, like, I should have been on your side and help you get the power of darkness the whole time, um, it raises some questions, as in, like, why does she think now that that would have been the better solution than um, siding with the prisoner? So all these are interesting questions that I have that I'd like to see answered in a sequel.
exactly. There's just enough there to kind of make you want to see a sequel. And even though it's never it's really interesting, this movie, because there's just enough information given to keep you hooked, to draw you in. But if you think about it too much, it's kind of like, oh, you didn't, like, you don't know who they are. You don't know their names, but none of that's it's all irrelevant. It's very much, the more I think about it, like a video game.
Yeah, I think the video game approach is really the only thing that makes sense of this
Yeah.
movie, because otherwise, like, there's not really much of a plot to speak of. It really is, and especially with the Gen X mentality you were talking about too,
Yeah.
those were the types of video games that Gen X
Yep.
grew up with, where it
That's
was,
right.
you fight through the minions, you
Yep.
defeat the villain, and you rescue the princess.
Yeah. You collect your the things that you need, and you have your
Mhm.
goal, but you didn't really have any, even, I mean, some of the characters had names, but yeah, a lot of them, it was just tiny bits of plot stringing together action scenes, which is exactly what this is.
Or, like, going back to some of the old RPGs, which had more story to them, but many
Mm,
times the protagonist in them would be a nameless character, or who,
yeah.
like, never spoke, because it was supposed to be like a stand-in for the player.
Yeah. 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 And if you think about it too, if he was such a huge fan of George Miller, Mad Max, do they ever, they never even really refer to him by name. Maybe once or twice in the first film before the apocalypse, but he essentially becomes the man with no name as the films progress into the trilogy. So it becomes less and less relevant who he was, who he is, and it's still interesting.
And then you also have the Highlander comparison there too, because I believe, if I'm remembering that correctly, um Connor is, changing his life the more that he
Yes.
survives.
Right. Yeah. I just rewatched that a few months ago and thoroughly enjoyed it. Just because
Mhm.
I hadn't seen it since I was in high school, and I was like, man, this is a good movie. Like, but yeah, you see a lot of that similar kind of ethos in this movie, where it's a good guy, bad guy, but You're not actually sure exactly where they tell you where they come from, but there's not a whole lot of backstory. It's not like we get the full Anakin Skywalker treatment, but you don't need that. And it really, I don't know. I kind of felt like rewatching this that it made me think some of the movies I see now, newer movies, there's almost too much backstory. Like this is a tight movie. It's not very long, and you know it doesn't need to be. The point is to entertain people.
Mhm. Now, also, originally, when he first started doing this film, he had conceived of it as a sequel to his short film called Down to Hell. I'm not sure if you've ever seen that movie
No, I
or if you know
haven't.
anything
Have you
about it.
seen it? No.
I have
Is
not
it?
seen it, but I am just looking it up now, and it says the plot of it on Letterbox is four guys kidnap random people from the street, take them to a remote forest, and give them three choices: run away, kill us, or die. The film follows
Mm,
the fate of one of their victims.
hmm.
So that's the only thing I know.
Oh,
But
that
obviously, the
sounds.
forest aspect probably. So I think what he probably intended initially was for whatever happened in the forest is that these whoever died there would have come back is probably where he had this idea, like maybe instead we have the people come back to life is probably what
Yeah,
he was thinking, and then it evolved into something different after that.
yeah, definitely. And I like the fact that well, that he shot the whole thing outside. I don't think there's any inside scenes in this movie
No,
at
none.
all. And that must have been quite hard for the actors too, because again, the changing weather and the changing seasons, but let's drive out to this forest and shoot on weekends kind of a movie.
Hmm.
But at least in Evil Dead, Bruce Campbell got to be inside the little cabin sometimes. So this isn't that. This is all it's amazing thinking about it that it's for such an expansive outside movie, it does feel very contained and almost claustrophobic, like they can't get out.
And I don't know if you've done any filmmaking yourself, but I've shot outside, and it's a very different experience from
Yes.
shooting
Yeah.
inside because inside it's a very controlled environment. You have control over the acoustics and all that, whereas
Yep.
outside you've got no control over the background noise. If
No.
if you're trying to shoot something in what is supposed to be an isolated forest, or if you're trying to do like a like a scene with like a samurai scene or something like that, and a truck drives by on the nearby road and honks its horn, you got to
Yeah,
deal
then
with
you
that.
got it, or a bird flies through the frame. Yeah,
Right.
no, yeah, I did a short film years ago and the inside stuff was a lot easier.
And that's before you just get into all the just general ambient noise, right? All the like just the sounds of the forest are people I think people forget, but forests are freaking noisy as hell.
You don't realize it. I shot mine in the autumn when the leaves were dry, and every step the actor took, oh my
Yeah.
God. But it worked out. But we were blessed with really good sunny weather that 2 days. But yeah, this must have been really everything you see on the screen is how do I say it? This is one of those films like Evil Dead and like the early Peter Jackson films. It's a labor of love. You can see the love of cinema and the love of making films in every frame of this movie.
Yeah, absolutely. There are two other things I wanted to mention too that I had mentioned here in my notes. First off is the fact that we have zombies that can wield guns. I thought that was just
Yeah.
really, really fun. It's like, talk about breaking all the rules. That's one,
Yeah.
most zombies can never like wield anything. And here these zombies are pulling out guns and shooting back.
And they feel pain, which is a
Yes.
first, I believe. That I've never seen that in any other zombie film, that they can feel pain. Yeah, I mentioned that, and because I do write about this film in my book, and I do mention that it's a cool zombie gunfight. Like
Mhm.
but they're also newly resurrected. They haven't started to rot yet, which they do mention in the film. The longer this goes on, your body will disintegrate and you will become, you'll rot. But yeah, it's pretty cool. Like, and I think the first zombie with a gun we had was Day of the Dead, right, Bob?
Oh, I never saw that one, so I'm not sure.
Oh yeah. He learns how to use. He's a soldier who passed away during the zombie apocalypse, and he remembers, but he can't really wield it so much as he just kind of holds it up and shoots it, and
Okay.
So yeah.
And the other thing I mentioned here is these two Yakuza guys. So you've got the leader, Kenji Matsuda, and then the guy with the glasses, Kazuhito Oba.
Yes,
Is it just me, or are those two guys definitely gay?
I thought so.
Okay,
Because
yeah, because
he's okay with killing everybody but him. Those two are tight. They're
right.
like, I assumed they were either gay or maybe they grew up together, maybe they've known each other forever, maybe they're related. You really don't know. But for some reason they do seem to stick together through the whole thing when everybody else is expendable.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, yeah.
So,
And I think those are most of the things I wanted to mention about this movie. Did you have anything else that you wanted to talk about that we haven't mentioned so far?
Let me see. Yes, there was one point I wanted to mention that the man and the prisoner, obviously because in the past they were rivals, he doesn't just tease us with their they're going to have a showdown, a big fight in the movie at some point, but you think, okay, he teases us not once, not twice, but 3 times before we actually get to see the big fight. So you think it's going to happen, and then it keeps you motivated. It keeps you in the film. Like, you think, oh, now it's going to happen, and it doesn't happen. And something else happens that's unexpected. So he's really good with the twists and turns, I think, in this, as far as carrying the audience through to what they want to see. It cultivates a sense of anticipation. Like, you're invested in seeing these two guys fight.
Yep, absolutely, yeah. But I think that's pretty much everything I had to say. And if that's the only other thing you have to say, then I think we'll probably start wrapping this up. If you have
Yeah.
any final words about Versus.
No, I I don't know if you want to cut this part out. Can I plug my book?
Yes, absolutely, you can.
Okay,
Yes,
yeah,
absolutely. Never have to apologize for that.
because I forgot last time. So, so yeah, I included verses in my book, and the book is titled Japanese Cult Cinema: Films from the Second Golden Age, Selected Essays and Reviews. And I included this film because it is part of what I consider to be the second golden age, which is mid 90s to the early mid 2000s, when a lot of films like this were getting global distribution and critical praise and box office success. It was such a, I don't want to say it was different, because it did come on the heels of The Matrix, but it was sort of a sensation when it came out in the States, at least in my city at the time. And a lot of academic books don't include this film, but I think Kitamura has become an important enough filmmaker. And again, I harken back to the fact that he's Generation X. He's an important representative of people like us who want to see movies like this and want to make movies like this. So and for that reason, I think it's probably should be given more attention than maybe it has been given. I think in Britain, Arrow Video has put out a special edition Blu-ray, but I haven't seen it yet.
And I know he's done an interview with Midnight Eye, I think, about this movie as well. So there's that floating around out there too, which I think you can find through Wikipedia.
Yeah, definitely. Midnight Meat Train's probably the one that people would know more. That's got more rumor value. But if you tell people, watch this, and I've never recommended it and had someone say they didn't like it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think Midnight Meat Train would probably be very familiar to him. But I think also Godzilla Final Wars would probably be also very familiar to a lot of people. Yeah, at least in the West.
Yeah,
in
definitely.
Japan, I think he'd probably be more famous for either Lupin the Third or maybe even Azumi.
Azumi. Yeah,
Yeah,
that's what I was
because I've
going to
heard that
say.
one mentioned a lot, even though I haven't actually seen it myself yet. But I know it was based on a manga, if I'm not mistaken.
It was, yes. That's on my list too. But yeah, and looking forward to kind of seeing what else he does going forward because he is an interesting filmmaker.
Mhm. Yeah, and I'm curious to see if he will ever get around to making the sequel to this, because now
I
it's,
hope so.
10 years after he said it was supposed to come out, and as far as I know,
24
no other
years,
news.
yeah.
Yeah.
And the actors aren't getting any younger, as I said, but they still look good. Because
Mhm.
that's one thing I loved about this movie right away is there's so many glamour shots in this movie. Everybody looks great. Even when they're just having regular dialogue, it's not over the shoulder, it's straight on. And they're lit really well and everybody's beautiful and it's just, it's so stylized. It's one of those films you can kind of take it apart a little bit frame by frame and go,
Mhm.
you know.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, Jen. Well, thanks a lot for coming back on. And why don't you tell people where they can find you?
You can find me on jenuptonwriter.com. You can also find my book on Amazon or other online portals. Japanese Cult Cinema, Films from the Second Golden Age, Selected Essays and Reviews by J.M. Upton. And you can also find me on Groovy Doom Drive-In Asylum. I'm frequently a guest every few months on there. We've never done a Japanese film on there. We should, though.
That's your claim to fame, so you definitely should.
Yeah, that's a fun show to do. Really fun. Yeah. I'm trying to think what the last film we did was. Oh, and I was also just on Making Tarantino podcast, which is really interesting. Because it's the
Okay.
films that inspired Quentin Tarantino, basically.
Oh, that's really interesting.
Yeah.
So yeah, make sure to look those up, because by the time people are hearing this, it's been some time since we're recording this in
Yeah.
mid-July. But did definitely check those things out. We'll also have links to your book and your website
Yep.
in the show notes, so please make sure to go check those out. As for us, japanonfilm.com is the website, and Japan on Film is the address on Twitter, or not Twitter anymore, sorry, on Instagram, Threads, and Blue Sky. So please make sure to follow us on there. And of course, we're also a member of the Film Stories Podcast Network. So please be sure to check them out at filmstories.co.uk and listen up after the credits to hear what's coming up next on the network. Thanks for listening, and we'll talk to you next time. The Japan on Film podcast is produced by me, Perry Constantine, in conjunction with the Film Stories Podcast Network. Visit japanonfilm.com for show notes, episodes, and information about being a guest yourself. You can also reach out to me on the website's contact form if you have questions or comments about Japanese movies or the show itself. The show is at Japan on Film on Threads, Blue Sky, and Instagram, so please be sure to follow us. If you'd like to support the show, you can donate on japanonfilm.com, purchase from our advertisers, or leave a review on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. Join the Film Stories Podcast Network Discord from the link in the show notes to connect with me and many other cinema fans and podcasters.